Hey guys, welcome back to Horsepower Obsessed. I have some more information on the C8 Mid-Engine Corvette that I thought we could talk about today. I actually came across a video of Bob Lutz, who was a previous vice chairman of General Motors, talking about the C8 Mid-Engine Corvette and kind of going over some things that indicated that they had tried to do this in the past and for various different reasons ended up going a different direction. But let's get right into it. Okay, so right in the very beginning, he talks about how the top-end sports car for GM or for any company really has to have the most up-to-date tech inside of it. So that goes as far as, you know, navigation, PDR, all the way up to the most recent technology and advances in the engine. So just for argument's sake, though, we're going to start with just kind of something I came across the other day was obviously for the interior. The PDR in the current Corvette is set up in a way where you can record when you're on the track. It can actually specify what track you're on, so it can show you start and end times and everything. And what I came across recently was actually Porsche had taken that technology and kind of developed it with another company to give you, on your actual heads-up display, it would actually give you lines very similar to the way it does in like Forza, which is a video game for Xbox, so for those of you who don't know. It will actually give you lines that display right on your windshield, showing you when you should brake and when you should accelerate in and out of turns. Now, this is kind of cool. It's definitely up there with the latest tech. Right now, I don't hear anything about Chevy doing it, but the fact that Porsche took this from Chevy's PDR setup tells me there could be some sort of collaboration here, and maybe we would see this in a more recent Corvette.
The Corvette is kind of a symbol of the pinnacle of GM technology. So I think Chevrolet believes correctly, or GM believes correctly, or Mark Royce believes correctly, that you cannot market your premium sports car with anything but the latest technology.
Now here he talks a little bit about how Taj initially wanted to do a mid-engine Corvette right around this time the C6 was still being produced. Obviously that was also around the time that GM and Chevy came under some financial stress that obviously had to have plans like that canceled because of. But it's interesting to see that this has been in the works for that long.
The truth is, as Taj Uchter told me at the time, we wanted to do the original mid-engine Corvette, which was just before the 07-08 financial meltdown, which, you know, canceled that plan.
Now, obviously, Taj wanted to do something with the mid-engine in the 6th generation, but ended up not being able to because of the financial situation. But the biggest reason he wanted to do that with the 6th generation was because the weight transfer to the rear was not enough with the front engine Corvette. So ultimately, he has been pushing for a mid-engine Corvette since he's been there.
He came to me and said, the next one's got to be mid-engine. And I said, why? And he said, because we're at the limit of what we can achieve with the conventional rear drive front mid-engine layout. We're just not transferring enough weight to the rear axle, et cetera, et cetera.
Now here he states one of the biggest reasons the C7 ended up not being a mid-engine, even though that's what a lot of people pushed for originally, was because some of the engineers there didn't want to quote-unquote emulate Lamborghini, and they wanted to keep the cost low. So he goes on to say that the Corvette was basically, you know, supposed to be an affordable sports car. And if they made it mid-engine, it was likely going to increase the price to the point where it was no longer considered an affordable sports car. So this kind of factors in again to what some people believe and what some people don't, that the C8 is going to be priced a little bit higher. I mean, I believe it is definitely going to be priced higher, especially the higher-end models like the Z06 and the ZR1. It's definitely going to be higher than the current Z06s and current ZR1s. And this kind of just confirms my opinion on that. If a lot of the engineers there weren't willing to change over to a mid-engine design because of the cost, odds are good it's going to be higher.
we went to Rick Wagner, the reaction was the same. Rick said, oh no, we're not going to do that. The Corvette is value for money sports car. We're not going to try to emulate Lamborghini and so forth.
Here he talks about why the C7, even though it wasn't mid-engine, was able to achieve slightly better performance than the Z6, and also why it's at the end of its abilities to do so. Taj has been talking about, since the C6, talking about the front engine rear drive layout being pretty much maxed out, and he was able to squeeze a little bit more performance out of the C7, Bob Lutz says, by increasing the wheelbase by 2 inches.
And we had to do one more iteration off of the C6, which turned out to be the C7, where Taj was able to milk a little bit more chassis performance out of it, partially by a 2-inch wheelbase extension. But now I think we're at the absolute end.
Here he talks about the fact that he believes at least one of these versions is going to be hybrid. I've talked about this in my previous videos. Some of the patents filed seem to suggest the same. Basically, with the hybrid option, it makes the reality of an all-wheel drive option very real, because the rear engine would drive the rear tires and the hybrid option would drive the front tires.
In order to be environmentally acceptable and semi-politically correct, at least one version will be a plug-in hybrid with a small battery, which will, rapidly recharge, and electric motors on the front axle, so that when you're coming out of a corner, you draw down that battery, essentially with all-wheel drive. But the front wheels will be electrically driven, which could also come into play in winter if anybody is foolhardy enough to take a Corvette out in snow and ice.
He goes on to say that the Cadillac mid-engine was planned at one time previously as well. And for me, this kind of keeps some of the rumors alive that a lot of people believe that this car we're seeing is not a Corvette, that it is actually a Cadillac. And the fact that a Cadillac mid-engine was also planned at one point, kind of keeps that alive. I'm not 100% sure that I would agree that this is not a Corvette, but at the same time, it's definitely possible.
That was planned with the original program, and what we had planned for the Cadillac was, at the time, the Noble 4-cam engine, and the Corvette was going to stay with push rods, and they had completely different bodies. The Corvette was very Corvette-themed, angular, a little bit jagged, and the Cadillac was going to be the successor to the XLR.
Now, this part here I've also touched on. He talks about how, due to the mid-engine setup of the car, it's likely going to end up looking a lot like other mid-engine cars out there. Like I said, I touched on that in one of my previous videos. I'm not a huge fan of the mid-engine styling, and I really hope GM can do something to kind of change that for me. And like I said, if anyone can, I'm usually pretty partial to GM styling, so I think they could do it. But at the same time, a lot of the mid-engine cars out there, a lot of them look very similar because of the design that has to go into it. And he kind of touches on the same thing here, and I really hope GM can do something to kind of break that mold.
It's hard these days to make a mid-engine sports car look different from the flock of mid-engine sports cars that are already out there. I think Ford achieved that very nicely with the GT, but predominantly thanks to that very long tail. Mm-hmm. Take away that very long tapering back end, the sort of, in your mind's eye, chop off 12 to 18 inches of it, and it's going to look like, once again, pretty much anybody else's mid-engine car.
Yeah. Lastly, he talks about the possibility of Corvette being its own brand. This was heavily talked about a couple months ago because Hyundai kind of did the same thing with separating itself from its Genesis brand. This, like I said, it was talked about a pretty good bit not that long ago, where it wasn't going to be a Chevrolet Corvette anymore, but it was just going to be called a Corvette, which would then kind of leave them open to one being a Corvette and then this new one being a Corvette Zora or a Corvette whatever, that would literally give you the option of having two models that coexist together. So that would definitely give them an opening to create the C7 and the C8 together. Now, I don't necessarily believe that they're going to do that. I think that financially it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to have a production model for both cars. But at the same time, if they did change it from a Chevrolet Corvette to just Corvette, it's definitely a way to open people up to that idea. So it's possible, I guess.
Is Corvette
SUV.
Is it just a Chevrolet model, or could Corvette become a separate brand? I think Corvette is one of those brands that, just like Porsche went from two-seat rear-engine sports cars, and now they have a whole lineup, including SUVs. It's not something you would ever put in a separate dealer body for, because the volume would never carry it, but you'd have select Chevrolet dealers handle that. And I think there is latent value in the Corvette name and Corvette reputation that could be moved to other types of vehicles without hurting the Corvette brand.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you liked what you saw, give me a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And I will catch you in the next upload.